Hi, I'm Marcia Westcott Peck. I'm a landscape designer and a columnist with the Oregonian for the last 10 years, along with my husband Dennis Peck. And today we're going to show you how to plant tomatoes.
Hi, I'm Sarah Smith from the Garden Smith Landscape Design. I'm an avid vegetable grower, and I'm excited to be showing Marcia how to plant a couple different types of tomatoes. Today we're going to be planting two different tomatoes. This one here is a seed-grown tomato that's on its own roots. This is generally what you're going to be planting. And then we're also going to plant a grafted tomato. And it is actually two tomato plants. We've got the tomato roots, and then we've got the tomato top. And the variety of tomato that's used for the roots is one that's bred for some special thing, like either being super vigorous or disease resistant. Whereas the top is like your classic heirloom tomato. In this case, it's mortgage lifter. They both are planted very differently, so we'll show you how that's done. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to clip off the lower leaves. The reason I'm doing this is that this plant will grow roots all along the stem, so it's going to make it a sturdier, better plant. It's going to have more roots to take up moisture and nutrients. You want to make sure your tomato's well watered before you plant it. We're just going to dig a deep hole, and then we've got a couple fertilizers. One is just a balanced organic fertilizer. Read the package instructions and that will tell you how much you should be using. For this tomato plant, I'm going to use about half a cup, which for me is a small handful. And then we've got some bone meal for extra calcium. I'm going to mix them in with my little shovel here. I'm going to put it way down in that hole and just scooch the soil back up around it. And then I'm going to place the tag in there so that we'll know this is a variety called chocolate. So this will be one that's not going to be red when it's ripe. It's probably going to be kind of a brownish purple color. Here we have our grafted tomato. So this one, we don't want to plant like the seed-grown tomato. We want to plant it just as deep as it is in the pot. So I'll dig a much smaller hole, and then I'm going to put the same amount of fertilizer in there and bone meal. And I'll dig that in. And then I'll just gently tip this out of the pot. Now this one's, the roots are a little tight on here, so I'm going to want to go ahead and loosen those up. And the grafted tomatoes tend to have a pretty vigorous root system. All right, and then when I'm planting this, I want to make sure that it's not deeper. We really don't want this stem to be underground, because then it will root out and you've lost all of the advantages of having a grafted tomato plant. When I'm planting tomatoes, I like to make sure that the foliage isn't touching the ground. There can sometimes be some disease spores or something in the soil that could splash up onto the leaves or get onto the leaves and then move up through the plant. There's a few different types of tomatoes: determinate tomatoes and indeterminate tomatoes. And indeterminate tomatoes tend to just want to keep on growing. They're really a vine-like plant and they can get ginormous. Determinate type tomatoes tend to stay bushier, and some people say that they will just produce all at once and then stop producing, and then they need enough room to grow. So if you're growing in a container or a real confined space, or maybe you just have a little tiny planter box on your balcony, that's where I would choose one of the determinate tomatoes that tends to stay a little smaller and bushier. Or even there are some dwarf tomatoes that you could get that still produce full-size fruit, but they're just a super small plant. For support for them, the determinate tomatoes can probably just be in a regular tomato cage as long as it's fortified with some bamboo stakes. The indeterminate ones are going to need some sturdy support, and a tomato cage by itself is not going to do it. Marcia has this great teepee idea where she's taken 3 pieces of bamboo, tied them together up at the top, and we'll want to get it in there good and sturdy. And then as the tomato grows up, Marcia and Dennis can just take some twine and just tie around it to keep it up off of the ground. So once we get our tomatoes planted in the ground, we want to give them a nice deep watering. They'll probably need to be watered a couple times a week until we get to the really hot part of summer, and then they might need more. To check and see if your tomatoes need water, the easiest way to do it is just use your finger. Stick it down into the soil, and if it feels moist, you're good. If not, go ahead and give it a little water. So the tomatoes are going to want full sun. They don't really like that really hot afternoon sun. So if they're going to be in a spot where it's kind of baking, you would want to be able to provide a little afternoon shade. You want to make sure you space them appropriately so there's enough air circulation in between them. I will generally plant my tomatoes 18 to 24 inches apart in a single row in my garden. If you're planting in a pot, I would probably just stick to 1 tomato per pot. They're going to grow big. If you're growing a tomato that's a color that you're not familiar with, you don't know what it's going to look like when it's ripe, like this chocolate one, a good way to tell, pretend that my hand is your tomato and my wrist is that little thing that it connects to the plant with. If you're not sure if it's ripe, just give it a little bend like that, and if it just breaks off at that little wrist, that means it's pretty close to ripe.
There is nothing like a homegrown tomato. If I only have space for one thing, it's going to be a tomato.